Hello, and welcome to Learn, Make, Learn, where we share qualitative and quantitative perspectives on products to help you make better. My name is Ernest Joachim, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Joachim Groger. Hey, Joachim, how's it going?
I'm good. I'm just coming off a 2-week vacation, so I'm in a very happy place. Well, actually, like relaxed place, but now I have to get back to work, so I don't know how I feel about that anymore. But yeah, it's nice. The sun is out here in Seattle, so that's good. Yeah. How about you, Ernest?
Yeah, good on my end. Actually, my wife is away as of today, visiting her parents, so I'm living the bachelor life at least for the next week and a half. Me and the cats.
You and the cats, yeah. Wait, are the cats all boys as well?
Oh no, 2 boys and 1 girl.
Okay, so kind of a bro fest, but not completely.
Yeah, it is. Well, jumping to today's episode, this is actually episode 28. And today we're going to bring you our second Toolbox episode. Our first was way back in episode 3, where we discussed the jobs to be done approach to customer-centric product and service innovation. Just as a refresher, the idea behind these Toolbox episodes is to highlight tools that we hope will help you in your day-to-day work of making products. Today, our focus is the Maya principle, which was an approach to graphic and product design established by Raymond Loewy, who's broadly considered the figure most responsible for establishing industrial design as a commercial profession. But before we dive into Maya, we wanted to share a follow-up to our previous episode. Joachim, you want to dive into that?
Well, last time we were talking about watches, and a friend and listener had to brag about his watch that he had just acquired. So I said, well, I'll give it a shout out. So it's a watch by the company Fortis, Fortis, which has been around for, well over 100 years. They were founded in 1912 or so. Their history is kind of interesting. They've always been viewed as a lower end, budget-friendly watch manufacturer. But there's some interesting heritage there. So, first self-winding wristwatch.
Really?
Was made by Fortis, yeah. So the company was founded by Walter Vogt, and then he set up production with John Harwood, who was the inventor of the automatic wristwatch. And then he released this Harwood Automatic, which was the first self-winding wristwatch, which was introduced in 1926 at Baselworlds.
Wow.
And so which is crazy. I didn't realize. I don't think it's something that they play up very much. And they also were one of the first manufacturers to work on getting waterproof wristwatches. So a lot of firsts from this company. They also were one of the first companies that were thinking about watches that could stand up to extreme weather conditions, temperature fluctuations with their spacematics. The watch was tested by people on the space program, the US space program. And then since 1994, they've been the official watch for the Russian Federal Space Agency. Right. So also kind of a interesting connection to space, kind of like Omega with their Speedmasters. So I didn't know about this, but unfortunately they went bankrupt in the late 2010s. So about almost 10 years ago in 2017, they were basically done. And the company was then taken over by a private investor, Jupp Philipp, Jupp Philipp. And he was just a fan of the brand. And clearly as a man of some means, and was able to buy up the company and renamed it Fortis Watches AG as opposed to Fortis Uhren AG, for turning it a little bit more international. And they've relaunched their watches. And so my friend has a Marine Master, which is, of course, everything with Master is always going to be loaded with stuff. But the watch he showed me is a diving watch, very subtle, very tastefully done, wears nicely on the wrist. And I was really impressed with the finishing on it. It's a pretty impressive piece of equipment, and it's about $3,200. It's a really functional tool watch. and one that you could have as your everyday if you want something that's more elevated than just a Casio or something like that. This is definitely a watch that's great. So I think the brand is very interesting. We'll put a link into the website. The Marine Master is one of many of their line of watches. They also, of course, make pilot's watches that are really interesting. So there's heritage there and very interesting, clean design. So their aesthetic is very much just trying to be tool watches that are not flashy, very wearable and very usable. And yeah, I rate the aesthetic. Is a pretty cool watch when I was holding it in my hand. So yeah, as a follow-up to our Watches and Wonders discussion about the excesses of luxury, which is exactly what my friend was talking about. It's like, well, here's a watch for you that's not excessive, overpriced, very wearable, and very smart looking. So yeah, 40s.
That's great. I've only seen images, but it looks great in pictures. Fortis has been a bit of a blind spot for me, so I wasn't familiar with it. So it was great to see that.
Yeah. Shout out to Ben. Thank you for sharing.
That's awesome. All right. Well, now let's get into the Maya principle. Starting with a quick background on the man behind it, Raymond Loewy. Born in Paris in 1893, Loewy immigrated to New York in 1919, and in a career that spanned decades, he would come to be known as the man who shaped America and the father of industrial design. I'm quoting here from a brief biography from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and we'll include a link to the full version in the show notes, but here's their biography. So, quote, Loewy's firm, Raymond Loewy Associates, was associated with a steady stream of U.S. design icons, including the Cold Spot refrigerator, Lucky Strike cigarette packaging, Greyhound buses, Studebaker cars, Coca-Cola dispensers, radios, sewing machines, and Rosenthal dinnerware, as well as corporate graphics for Exxon, Shell, and the U.S. Postal Service. This range testified to the potential impact of industrial design on the daily lives of millions, and its power as a commercial tool. Loewy understood how essential package design and branding could be in the success of a product or an organization. In this respect, one of his most potent designs was for John F. Kennedy's Air Force One, which began flying in 1962. His modern and elegant design of the plane's delivery transformed this particular Boeing 707 into an important element of the Kennedy administration's global brand. And just a quick side note here from me, Loewy's livery continues to define the appearance of Air Force One to this day. All right, now going back to Momo's biography. Quote, in his late career, Loewy was again at the heart of the American establishment as a consultant to NASA, and his firm produced more than 3,000 designs for space-related products. At the same time, despite intense rivalry between the American and Soviet Union superpowers during the height of the Cold War, Loewy also designed prototypes for a range of industrial products at the request of the Soviet state. The episode demonstrates that as far as industrial design was concerned, the Iron Curtain was more permeable than the political rhetoric of the time would have us believe, unquote. And I wanted to share that because Loewy, as influential as he was, called the father of industrial design, I think is not as well known these days as some other figures like Dieter Rams or more modern figures, certainly, like everyone talks about Johnny Ives.
Oh, yeah.
Had you heard of Loewy at all?
I had heard of the Maya principle in passing.
Okay.
But and then, of course, as you started naming the things he designed, I'm like, yes, intimately familiar with all these things, but not the name.
Right.
Definitely not the name.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of that, so in addition to a link to this biography I just quoted, I'll also provide a link to a wonderful 60-minute segment from 1979 that provides visuals of many of Loewy's most iconic designs and also features an extended interview with the man. He was still alive at the time. So that's definitely a fun watch. Now, as I noted in the intro, the thing we're focusing on today is the idea that was at the core of Loewy's approach to design, which he called the Maya principle. To explain it, I'm going to reference an article from a digital design agency called Visions. They do a nice job of providing a synopsis. All right, so quote, from the sleek design of the Greyhound bus to the iconic Coca-Cola bottle, Loewy's work epitomized innovation intertwined with familiarity. Central to his philosophy was the Maya principle, most advanced yet acceptable, a concept that has since guided designers and marketers in creating products that push boundaries while remaining accessible to the public. At its core, the Maya principle is about striking a delicate balance between novelty and recognition. As explained by Derek Thompson in his book Hitmakers, consumers are drawn to innovations, but also crave a sense of familiarity. Loewy believed that successful designs seamlessly blend innovation with elements that resonate with the consumer's existing experiences. Take Apple's iPhone, for instance. Despite its groundbreaking capabilities, Apple introduced it as a phone, leveraging familiarity to ease consumers into a revolutionary new device. Each subsequent model brought incremental changes, maintaining the balance between advancement and acceptability. By contrast, Google Glass, with its ambitious technology, struggled to gain acceptance due to its intrusive and unfamiliar design. The lesson here? Being ahead of the curve doesn't guarantee success if consumers aren't ready for the leap. For product designers and marketers, applying the Maya principle involves strategic steps. Understanding the audience's familiarity with the product, introducing innovations gradually, and framing new features within the context of user experiences and needs, unquote. Now, I thought their reference to the iPhone was a really interesting one in that, it might seem now that introducing multi-touch in the iPhone was just patently obvious, right? But within Apple, the concept was actually originally developed for a tablet-style computing device, what would eventually come to market as the iPad. But at least as the story goes, well into the program, which was codenamed Project Purple, Steve Jobs recognized that the multi-touch technology was a huge departure from existing modes of human-computer interaction, and therefore had to be introduced in a product that would be essential to customers' lives, that they'd get straight away. And so the Project Purple team shifted their focus to a phone form factor, and then the rest is history. So just a point, I think, buttressing the vision team's highlighting of the iPhone as being a good example here of kind of easing people, giving them that acceptable form factors for something that was otherwise very, very innovative. So, what might seem patently obvious in hindsight really was very much an example of the Maya principle in action. Ironically, I think you could make the argument that the failure of Apple's Vision Pro, their extended reality headset, is rooted in the company's failure to apply the Maya principle. And then by contrast, I'd say you could argue that Meta, by leveraging people's familiarity with existing eyewear form factors, specifically Ray-Ban sunglasses, has found much greater success in the still nascent spatial computing space. Now, that's all in the tech world. I can also cite an example here from the world of footwear. And this is something we've actually highlighted in the past, but I think it's worth touching on again because it's so germane to today's topic. It comes from an anecdote that Phil Knight shared in his memoir, Shoe Dog, that was published back in 2016. And now I'm quoting Phil Knight here. Quote, a former aerospace engineer, M. Frank Rudy, came into the office with his partner Bob Bogert and pitched their crazy idea, injecting air into a running shoe. It sounded like something out of a comic book, but Rudy was persistent. Finally, I agreed to stuff one of his air soles into my own shoes and go for a run. 6 miles later, I was convinced, and Rudy began working on prototypes for what became the Nike Air. In late 1978, we launched the Tailwind, a shiny silver shoe stuffed full of a dozen innovations, including Rudy's patented air soles. We hyped this thing to the heavens, with a splashy ad campaign and dreams of something that would eclipse even the waffle trainer. In a matter of weeks, the dream turned to dust. The Tailwind was a disaster. Customers were returning the shoes to stores complaining that they fell apart. A shoe autopsy revealed the problem. Bits of metal in that silver paint acted like razor blades on the shoe's upper, shredding the fabric. Half of the first generation of Tailwinds ended up in the recycling bins. We were devastated, but we'd also learned a valuable lesson. Don't put 12 innovations into one shoe. It's just too much for a shoe to carry and too much for a design team to pull off, unquote. And now I think there's an important point to highlight here that's a bit of a build on Loewy's core Maya principle. The way Loewy talked about Maya was always from a consumer's point of view, right? What's going to be the most advanced yet acceptable product for your customers. But in this anecdote, Phil Knight highlights an extension of Maya that speaks to the people making the product, right? The people behind the product. As Knight says, don't put 12 innovations into one shoe. And I've heard him simplify this even further as just saying, don't try to reinvent the upper and the midsole at the same time, right? Do one or the other, not both. And in the case of the original Tailwind, the core innovation was the air sole unit within the midsole. So focus on that and let the upper be that more approachable, more acceptable thing, both for your customers and for the team creating the product. So I think, the learning here is that the buyer principle can apply to the way you plan your products, both from a consumer proposition perspective and from an internal kind of capacity planning perspective to better position your teams for success. So Joachim, you had mentioned that you had heard of the Maya principle before.
Yeah, I didn't realize that I had heard it before. So I will add a link to this YouTube video that I'm going to reference now. The channel is Design Theory. I don't know if you've encountered this one, Ernest. It's a very good channel. It's run by John Mariello, who's an industrial designer. And the video that I watched years ago was how a designer saved Tesla from bankruptcy twice. And it's about von Holzhausen, the car designer, exterior and interior car designer for Tesla. And if you look at, this is all about the Model S, the initial version, the first electric car that Tesla was going to make. And it's a super interesting design problem because Tesla had no lineage. So there was nothing they could lean on. The 911 from Porsche is the 911. That's very rigid and tells you how this thing is supposed to look. If you're BMW, you're going to have a kidney grille. I mean, many manufacturers can lean on their history to initiate a design process and get going. And then again, it's baked into their lineage, the Maya principle. Like, this is something that and then we're going to tweak it. And so Tesla didn't have any of that. And so the video walks us through how he initially looked at other cars that were already on the road and then built off of those for their familiarity. And he initially looked at Aston Martin cars from the mid-2000s. So if you look at an Aston Martin next to a Model S, the lineage is very, very clear. But of course, the Model S has been stretched out and can seat, actually up to 7 people, I think, right, with a little rear bench that they can add to it. So they were able to reference something that's this 2-seater sports car, expanded to a sedan. So very, very clever design that relied on some familiarity. People had seen the Aston Martins. I mean, James Bond drove one, so it was already etched in everyone's consciousness. Plus, he actually did have a grille on the front of the car. If you recall, the first version of the Model S actually had that little oval. So the car still had a face, which is what car designers talk about, the cars having faces. And so this car had a little face. But of course, in later iterations, everyone knows the Model S. Well, now we're going to do the Model 3, which is kind of a shrunk down S, and we're going to lose the grille because we don't need the grille. So again, you're able to iterate through these various things, like the grille, completely unnecessary, just there to make you feel familiar to it. So again, I was very struck by that whole thing, and I didn't realize Loewy was, of course, the originator of this Maya principle. So very interesting. And I think electric cars are a good domain right now to see the Maya principle in action, because to a certain extent, these cars have to point to the future. They have to be futuristic, but they can't be too crazy futuristic because people are not ready for all of that. And again, I think people are going to think we're like Korean car manufacturer fanboys. But I feel like Hyundai they did it in a very similar way, where they took a very familiar shape in their hatchback, and then they said that's going to be what the electric car looks like. But it has this hyper-futuristic feel to it with the pixel kind of grid of brake lights, and the front lights look different. Everything is much more modern feeling, but it has this very familiar hatchback shape to it. Points to the future, references the past in just the right way that it's familiar. I think once you know about the Maya principle, you start realizing like so many of the products that we encounter are variations on this theme of something that's familiar, but it is new. And therefore it makes it easier for us to consume and adopt. However, part of me is also thinking there's a kind of conservatism inherent in that, right? That bothers me to a certain extent. And I think when you start reading about the Maya principle, Apple gets referenced a lot because they talk about how the iPhone was this revolutionary product in a very well legible and well understood form factor, the phone. And it also referenced many products that they'd already been making in the form of the iPods. So they were already on a journey of making thin rectangular things with screens. So, here's the phone. It makes sense. You're almost there. So people like that. And then they always, in the same breath, say, and then the Newton was a total disaster. And that's why you should adhere to the Maya principle, because the Newton was just so out there and no one understood what it was. And therefore it failed. And I found that overly simplistic.
Right.
So I think the Newton could have been a success. I think it was just, there were so many other factors in there. So just for completeness, the Newton is, so everyone understands, the Newton was Apple's attempt to make a personal digital assistant, which is a phrase that the CEO Scully actually coined himself. Like PDA was his acronym that he came up with to describe the Newton. And it had to fit in his pocket, was kind of like the industrial designer's brief and all of these things. The thing that's interesting about the development of it is you realize, like, this is a great product. Like, it's actually a really, really great product. It had an open ecosystem that allowed people to create apps for it, that they could code in C++ natively. You could beam those programs via infrared into the computer, into the Newton. Wi-Fi, the protocol that we rely on now for wireless internet, didn't exist. It was going to get released in 97. So they were ahead there. They were working within these tight constraints without the Wi-Fi that we take for granted today. But they were really pushing the boundaries. I think what the undoing of that product was not the lack of Maya principle. Because if you look at the design of it, the form factor is kind of unusual because it's exactly like a phone type of thing. We didn't have flat phones like that. But there's a lot of skeuomorphic UX elements in that.
Right.
Very recognizable. Contacts, calendar, typesetting, Word documents, all of the usual stuff you could already do on your desktop computer. They just had to shove in other stuff in there. So like the hand recognition pieces was not ready.
Right.
Would have been great if it could have worked. So why did they shove everything in there? And I think maybe that is the Maya principle. Right. It's not that the thing was too ahead of its time. It was the Phil Knight Maya principle.
Right.
You shoved too much stuff in at once. And not only that you shoved everything into one product, you did it on a timeline that was absolutely impossible to hit the goal that you had set for yourself. So it turns out, I didn't know this, that the development of the Newton put so much pressure on people that they were having mental health issues. This is so bad. Yeah, it was pretty bad. So I think it's kind of a lazy thing to say. Like the Newton is the failure of the traditional Maya principle is just too new and too crazy, and the iPhone was just perfect. I think it's more the Knightian Maya principle at work. Too many innovations, too much stuff happening. All of those things are totally legible and understandable. Like having your handwriting be recognized and converted into typed content. I think everyone would have understood that. We know how to write. That's not crazy. They had to also innovate on processor technology. It's probably the only piece of the Newton that has persisted, which is this chip architecture from ARM that they still rely on to this day. That's right. That still persists. So they built that relationship then. So yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance and subtlety to the Maya principle. I feel like it's not just this conservative thing, like iteratively moving through something. I like what you were saying, Ernest, that it's more this from the designers and a capacity perspective, that you should be asking yourself, wait a minute, can we actually pull all of this off? Or is this something that we could actually phase?
Right.
And I wonder to what extent, if they had given up on the Newton with the stylus, if they'd said no stylus, but maybe a small keyboard or something along those lines, it would have been much more successful. But I do think it does come back to the capacity of the producer, which is strange because the Maya principle is always positioned in this very consumer-centric way.
Right.
However, again, reversing what I just said. So I was reading about Loewy, and one of the last projects he worked on was the space station for NASA. So for the space station, he was tasked with designing the internals of this place. And of course, it had to be somewhat familiar. So exactly that Maya principle. Like, you're obviously in orbit around the Earth. This is completely out of the ordinary. So how do you create an environment that is still understandable and legible to a human being, that they feel reasonably comfortable despite being in zero gravity? So that very human-centric view of making it acceptable, but very, very crazy and out there, literally in outer space, is very interesting. The thing that he insisted on that I think is really, really powerful, and I think is the perfect summary of the principle, is that he insisted that they put a viewing portal that looked down on Earth for the astronauts. And that is just probably, I don't know, the most consequential and powerful thing you could do for the mental health of these people, is to tether them visually back to Earth, where they are from, and give them some sense of familiarity of what it is, where they are and what they're doing, and that they are human. So that to me is like, that's the human-centric version of the Maya principle. I think is really great. Like, that compassion and empathy for the person that's hurtling around the Earth, and there's no good reason to have a viewing portal other than it makes you feel better. That the person inside of this capsule will feel good about being there and know that they're doing this for the people down there spinning around on the globe. So, yeah.
Oh, that's such a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because fundamental to Maya, it stands for most advanced yet acceptable. So to be able to achieve that, you have to understand your customer, and at an intimate level. And that's such a great point, that he understood as a human, you would have this need to have a connection back to your home. And so I'm sure that was a very challenging engineering problem to solve, a viewport, a window.
Yes.
Right. But that's amazing that he had that level of understanding of the human condition to recognize that was essential.
Yeah, I think to me that embodies that principle. It's not that it is a conservative principle. It's a very human-centric principle.
Right.
Like, I think it's okay to challenge your customers and the people around you. I mean, art does that, right? Art is all about challenging someone. You're using materials that someone is familiar with and things that they've seen in some context or another context, but you're going to challenge them to do something. But you're doing that because you're still trying to get into their head. So, and to get into someone's head requires empathy and compassion, all these things. And I feel like when I've seen descriptions of the Maya principle, it's been very either so focused on just being iterative changes, so it becomes very bland and not informative. It doesn't get at the thing that is, it's fundamentally about the humanity of it. And then I think what you are adding to this, Ernest, is the capacities piece that I think that is really, really essential to the other side of it. It's both pieces that have to come together.
Right.
Yeah.
One added layer, I think, that your point about Tesla made me think of is it can also help in terms of more of like your long-term product planning, in that, for example, Tesla, their first product was actually their first Roadster, which was actually just a rebadged Lotus or re-engineered Lotus with electric underpinnings instead of an ICE engine. But, as you mentioned, as crazy as Musk is at the time, he was very clever about recognizing kind of this, what would be the most advanced yet acceptable version of an electric car that he could bring to market. And at that point, it was actually something very impractical. It was a toy. But for his audience, he understood his audience, and that's what his audience was looking for. That was the thing that would be acceptable for his audience, given the state of the technology at the time. I think that's a really, I think it was a very, again, in hindsight, it seems very obvious, but at the time, it was a very clever thing to do. to recognize that that was the right product for the audience at the time, knowing that eventually he wanted to take that know-how and put it into the Model S, which would get to a little bit more scale, and then take that know-how and put it into the Model 3, which gets to even more scale, right? So it can be a way to help guide your longer-term product planning and vision as well, by, kind of defining this evolution in a way that's fundamentally rooted in what your customer is looking for and what's going to be acceptable to them, and helping you build from that. Another thing that your Tesla example made me think of is that right around the same time that the Model S eventually came to market, BMW also introduced their first big EVs in the form of the i3 and the i8, which were very much the car example of the tailwind with, way too many things going on at once. And the products were hugely unsuccessful. It was, kind of close to the point of taking the whole company down, because BMW is actually not that big of a company, and they made a huge bet on these products, and both of them were huge failures. And by contrast, you see the Model S, which, just to your point, looked like a car, looked like a beautiful car, and even to the point of having a faux grille, to give people that accessible, acceptable entry point into an EV experience. And you could see, to BMW's credit, they learned from that. And now, they're back on the front foot in the EV space. They're actually one of the leading players in that space now. And it's based on basically making EVs that look like their ICE cars and vice versa.
Yeah, they look. It's very hard to tell,
right,
when you're looking at the internal combustion engines or the electric ones. So yeah, that's kind of. And back to my point, of taking a risk and pushing things. The i3s are so advanced.
Yeah.
There's so much going on in there. And yeah, they looked funky, and I think they must have thought they could get away with it because Smart existed, right? That had a funky, weird shape, and this was just a smarter version of that. But it obviously, they just forgot what people wanted out of it. I don't know. It's something about it just didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah.
But it's still a great design.
I know. I still love them. I still every so often think, there's good deals to be had on the used i3s.
Yeah.
Because it's still remarkable technology. The carbon fiber frame. It's and oh man, my car, my Mini Cooper SE, is built on that fundamental EV architecture that was established in the i3.
Of course. Yeah.
So I'm personally still benefiting from it. But it's just that they missed on the yet acceptable part of that Maya principle.
Yeah.
One last thing I'll mention. You mentioned the Newton. I actually still have an original Newton.
Whoa. Whoa.
I'm guessing, I haven't broken it out in ages. I'm guessing the battery's probably leaked, so it's probably broken at this point. But it still does things that computers don't do today. Like, you could write in the Notes app that was kind of at the core of the operating system, lunch with Joachim on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And it would, if it was able to actually translate your writing, it would understand what you meant. So it would actually then put a meeting in your calendar for Tuesday at 12 p.m. because you said lunch, and then cite, if you were in my contacts, it would include a link to your entry in my contacts. It would automatically do all that. It's it's so freaking cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It blows me away that our phones still don't really do that today. So
yeah.
But it is in a way also an illustration of just they tried to do too much.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Yeah, it was very impressive, but they needed to just get the input mechanism right.
Yeah.
To start with, and then layer on these other super cool features on top of it. But it was an incredible device. And to your point, I do think from a hardware perspective, it was very much that Maya device, right? Because it felt like a notepad.
Yes.
And you interacted with it like a notepad. And so one last thing I'll mention is I'll include a link in the show notes to this as well. There's a fantastic documentary. I think it's called General Magic, that talks about this device that followed the Newton called the General Magic. A lot of the folks who made it came from the Newton team. And they made this device that actually embodies a lot of the things that now are part of modern day smartphones. So they were way ahead of their time. Again, another huge failure, but it's a really interesting documentary, kind of that gives you some interesting lessons too as to why it was a failure, and a lot has to do with just trying to do too much as well. But a lot of the things you mentioned definitely brought up some interesting thoughts on my end as well.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that is making me think about Tesla again, and then the Newton as well. So as I was doing more reading about Maya, I will we will link to this original article, but some researchers who are in business schools who talk a lot about innovation, they're trying to understand the innovation process. And so there's this paper called Looking Across and Looking Beyond the Knowledge Frontier, Intellectual Distance, Novelty, and Resource Allocation in Science. Long title, but basically it's an experiment. They gathered about, I think, like evaluators and proposals for scientific research. So the evaluators are all researchers and the proposals are scientific projects. So this is supposed to mimic kind of how the National Science Foundation deals with grant applications and so on. So they had over 2,000 evaluator and proposal pairs. So different combinations of an evaluator and a proposal. And basically what they find at the end of this is, they basically ask each evaluator to give a score to say, do you think this is, a 10 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10? What they find is that there's a specific pattern in the data that suggests two things. If a person is a researcher in the area that they are evaluating, they will give harsher scores than someone who's not. So that could just be like they know more subtlety, or they're just more gatekeeping, right? It's not clear. Can't really ask them. They won't tell you the truth. The other thing that was interesting is, so distance to that subject is related to this final score, but also kind of the novelty. If something is very novel, they would also give it a very low score. So it would be negatively correlated, which is really interesting in science, like that the scientists would not value the novelty in and of itself, and novelty, of course, how do you codify novelty and all of those things, but let's just take it all for granted that they have a reasonable metric for it. And if you look at science, it does kind of progress in these very small things. And if you listen to the speeches of current Nobel Prize winners, a lot of them will tell you, I wouldn't be able to do this kind of research today because everyone is so incremental, and I sit so far outside of the current disciplines, there's no way for me to do this. The Maya principle is taking advantage of something in the human mind, which is familiarity means it's easy for me to access and easy for me to want to use this thing or engage with something. But taken too far becomes a bias where you start, potentially there's a chance that if something is too novel, you just dismiss it out of hand because you say this is so different from everything else. Right. So therefore it must not be good, which is a danger, right? So I feel like another piece in the toolkit is also just that, keeping in mind, like, I think we'll catch ourselves when we hear an idea that almost sounds like an idea we could have come up with ourselves, and we go like, ooh, I really like that idea. There's an element of that kind of, that's kind of something I was thinking about, and therefore it's a good idea. But I think we should also be embracing kind of like the anti-Maya for when we're evaluating new ideas, because that evaluation process is still so early in the process. Like, you should just be very open to things. And then the question is, now back to the Maya principle, how do I bridge the gap to the other person? What is it that I need to do to make them understand this thing? So I feel like that's the other broader piece of the picture that makes Maya work in your favor, which is you might have come up with something massively groundbreaking that is very, very different from everything else. The Maya principle is not telling you don't do that.
Right.
It's telling you, keep in mind that the person on the other end is subject to that need to be involved with something familiar. So I need to bring you along with a journey.
Mm-hmm.
Broken down into these stages. And you kind of know where this is going. There's a kind of inevitability to where they're going because they already have this extreme endpoint in mind that they want to go to, and they're going to just bring people on for that journey. So I feel like that's another way to interpret the Maya principle, which is there are gaps when you're innovating, but you need to bring someone along for the journey so they can learn and adapt to that thing as it's being developed. And don't talk down to them, bring them along to the journey, which I think comes back to the compassion thing again, and the empathy of a designer with their customers and the people at the end of the day. Yeah.
I love that. That's such a great, important point to make. In a way, I feel like maybe the guidance is to think about applying Maya at specific points in your overall product creation process. Like, we're talking about it could potentially be useful if you're at the early stages of planning your product portfolio and the cadence of the way you're updating your products.
Yeah.
But then in terms of when you're developing sort of those fundamental technologies that underpin those products, leave that open, right? Don't put these too many filters on that, because you have to allow those ideas to flourish, right? That maybe aren't what you were thinking. But then when you're starting to get close to the market, then maybe is the time to apply it again, and, really based on that deep understanding of your customer, what's going to make this approachable for them and acceptable for them, so that they have an entry point to it, and it's something that they can see fitting into their lives as well. I think that's a good way to end our conversation about Maya, or most advanced yet acceptable, the Maya principle that was created by Raymond Loewy. But really ending with your point, Joachim, that it's fundamentally rooted in an intimate understanding of your customer's needs. I thought your example of the space station was just such a great example of that. But hopefully this is something that you can apply in your kind of day-to-day of creating products. And we'd love to hear what you think about our perspectives on this. If you have any questions, if you have any thoughts or follow-ups or corrections, please do get in touch with us at learnmakelearn@gmail.com or on Threads at LearnMakeLearnShow, all one word. All right, now let's move on to our recommendations of the week. And I can get us started.
Sounds good.
Okay. I have a book I'd like to recommend. I'm still pretty early on in reading it, but it's really been phenomenal, so I feel pretty safe recommending it. It's called Apple in China, and it's by a journalist named Patrick McGee. And I was turned on to it by Ben Thompson of Stratechery. He runs a website as well as a popular podcast. And he's someone whose perspective I really respect. And he described it as the best book about Apple ever written, one of the best books about China ever written, and one of the best books about tech, period. So that convinced me to read it, to get started on it. And it has been phenomenal. And, lest you think it's just sort of a celebration of Apple, I'll read the conclusion to the book's synopsis from its publisher, which I believe is Simon & Schuster. So, quote, Apple in China is the sometimes disturbing and always revelatory story of how an outspoken, proud company that once praised rebels and troublemakers, the company that encourages us all to think different, devolved into passively cooperating with a belligerent regime that increasingly controls its fate. Unquote. So it's definitely not a flattering account, but it is stunning. Some of the stats in the forward about the scale of Apple's operation in China. It's mind-boggling. You just can't even wrap your head around the scale of Apple's operation and the impact that they've had on China, and now as a consequence that China is having on the world. So I think it's absolutely worth the read if you have any interest in Apple, certainly, but also just any interest in technology and in the impact of technology on societies. So Apple in China by Patrick McGee.
The podcast that I follow very regularly called Hidden Forces featured Patrick McGee recently. So we'll link to that as well. Great interview. Yeah. Great chat. Really, really interesting. And again, through the perspective of geopolitics, technology, the broader implications of what it means for Apple to be who they are right now and with whom they work. So yeah, fascinating stuff. So yeah, before we started recording, Ernest asked me, do you have a recommendation? And I couldn't remember for the life of me what it was, which is also why Ernest went first on the recommendation thing. So everyone, you're getting the little BTS here. So it's actually rechargeable batteries from a company called EBL, Echo Bravo Lima, EBL. And they sell nickel metal hydride rechargeable batteries. And I think if you know, back in the day, think back to when you were using like AA, AAA batteries that were rechargeable, they would not last for very long at all. I mean, they were terrible batteries. They wouldn't hold a damn charge and they would always run out and take forever to charge. And recently I've been trying to move some of my music equipment to more battery powered because I just want fewer cables. And in fact, my audio interface uses 4 AA batteries. And so I plugged in just Duracell batteries. And of course, I mean, it drained them in no time because it's a very power hungry beast with microphone preamps and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And I felt so foolish, like throwing away those batteries and then grabbing another pack. So I thought, what is the state of rechargeable batteries? And it turns out EBL is a very good manufacturer. They have their own chargers and they provide all kinds, AA, AAA, 9-volt block batteries, and various classes as well, from more like entry-level ones. I use the EBL 1100, which are just really great and charge pretty quickly. The charger that matches it, of course, has been designed with those batteries in mind, treats them with care, doesn't charge them super fast. So like the whole charging cycle, the way the power gets fed into the batteries is optimized for those batteries. And they last a really great long time. And I've just been slowly expanding the batteries that I'm replacing with those. I mean, our TV remote batteries with AAA haven't had to change them in at least a year now. I mean, remotes don't use very much either. And so just knowing that I can recharge this later on and get another year out of it is very powerful. So I recommend this. Like if you're in your house and I mean, I have small children that have battery-powered toys as well. That's also another reason to use these. But if you're finding yourself using disposable batteries for various tasks, try an EBL set. They sell them as packages with chargers and like about 10 batteries. And they're just a very high-quality rechargeable battery. So I would fully recommend those. And you always need batteries. Right. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. Do you know how they get around the memory effect that nickel metal hydride batteries used to have?
I don't know how they got around most of it. I don't even know if they have gotten around it. I think it's just a much more delayed part of it. I think they just have a better life cycle than old versions of it. I'm not sure what it is. I do think that their charger is treating the battery with great respect. So I feel like that's the secret sauce, I think, because now we have small enough microprocessors to be able to regulate those things actively and monitor multiple signals at the same time. I was just looking, full disclosure, Wirecutter, I think, is where I found these. And then, and I just, I just picked that top pick and only got like the battery and the charger and just thought, I'll give it a try and see what happens. And I've now accumulated, I think I've got 30 of these.
Wow.
And I'm using them in various settings from very high draining environments, such as my audio interface. Right. And I can get a good, I mean, if I run that thing full blast, 10, 12 hours out of it, which is very surprising. Yeah. And that comes from recharging them over and over again. And I'm not very careful. Sometimes I just drain them to death and then they come back up. It's fine. So far, so good. I've not had to replace any of them. They're holding their charge reasonably well. So I would, get a small pack. You can get them in packs of 4 as well if you don't want to fully commit. But yeah, I'm actually all in right now. I've got everything. Yeah.
That's a great, super useful recommendation. Thanks for that one.
Yeah, absolutely, guys.
All right. Well, I think that does it for us. Thank you so much for joining us here at Learn, Make, Learn. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to hear from you. Do you have any thoughts on anything we discussed or recommended this week? If so, what's your perspective? Or maybe there's a product or service you'd love to hear us focus on through the lens of product marketing. Whether it's a request, a question, or an observation, please do share your thoughts with us at learnmakelearn@gmail.com or on threads at LearnMakeLearnShow, all one word. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next Learn, Make, Learn.